Serious, what's the most real paranormal story you know? When I was a teen, my mother walked in my room, turned off my boombox, and walked out. Very strange, so I go after her to see what's up, and she's nowhere on the stairs. I look for her, and she's having a seizure in the kitchen. There was a decent sized pool of blood from where she hit her head, too. No way she could have gotten there and bled that much, even if she sprinted. Wigged me out. So in the hospital, I tell her. She got really quiet for a bit, then told me she had no memory from that whole day except from the floor she could see me standing at the kitchen entryway. Then I ran past myself into the kitchen. She has no other memory until waking up in the hospital a couple of days later. Decades later, I was dozing off in her hospice room. I thought I woke up to her by my chair, hand on my shoulder, telling me to take my dad to get some pie and coffee across the street. Then I actually woke up. It was so disorienting. I figure dad needs food and some air, so I convince him to go. When we walked back into hospice, her nurse came up and told us she had just passed. I think my mom wanted my dad out of there so she could go. I was 19 and living at home. I woke up one night and see this huge, it was almost reaching the ceiling, black hooded thing. It was just standing there next to my wardrobe. I froze and stayed in bed, too scared to move. It was there for about 10 seconds before it vanished. I had nightmares for weeks with that thing in it. Fast forward 15 years, my younger sister, who has had my old room for years, asks me if I had ever seen anything weird in the bedroom and tells me about the hooded thing that she had seen. I never told anyone about what I saw, especially not my sister, who was only 4 at the time. Phew, you okay? My cousin and I recalled this experience at her grandmom's house that I had blocked out of my mind. Her grandmom was bedridden at the time and the only one living in the house. We were laying in bed watching a show. Bedroom door was cracked. We could hear her grandmom snoring lightly. Her room was only separated from ours by the bathroom. I get sick to my stomach thinking about this next part. We started hearing footsteps in the hall. We immediately thought her grandmom had gotten out of bed, but we still could hear her snoring. The footsteps were slow and heavy, then got closer. I was truly paralyzed with fear. My cousin sidestepped to the door and quickly closed it with a fully outstretched arm. When we told my aunt the next day, she said, "Yeah, imagine how I felt growing up there. They won't hurt you." We had heard stories of the house being haunted, but that was our only first-hand experience. Truly terrifying. It was in my old apartment right before I moved out. My friends was staying over. I was on my phone ATM. She got up and left somewhere. With the corner of my eye, I saw her entering my room. When she came back, she asked me why did I wanted to scare her. I was confused cause I never left the room. She told me she was washing hands and she saw someone standing behind her in the mirror, but when she turned around no one was there. I asked her what was she doing in the room and she told she wasn't there. Next day, another friend was staying over. She couldn't sleep all night and cried because someone was running around the apartment, laughing. My dog was growling at the door, and she heard an old lady crying. Thank God I slept like a baby and didn't have to witness that. The next night I was alone and I could hear long nails tapping inside of the closet and heavy breathing. Yeah, thank God I moved away. The most compelling paranormal experience I've ever had was when my older sister had visions of the future. 3 of us sisters were playing in the kitchen while my dad was away hunting. My older sister screamed suddenly, staring in shock. Younger sis and I asked what was wrong. She said she saw a massive whitish column moving toward her. Not like an apparition, she had a vivid peripheral hallucination, the way many often do. But this one was uniquely powerful. We kept playing. 10 minutes later, she screamed again. This time, she thought our dad had entered the room, wearing an oddly greenish shirt. It was weird, and we made a point to cherish the spookiness of this evening. The next day, our dad was still away. My sisters were poking around in an old closet, and found a large white sack. It was unusually large, maybe 9 to 10 feet long, made of a tight hamper-like netting, and shaped like a sleeping bag. It was so bizarre, it spurred my younger sister to climb inside it, and chase older sis around the house. They found me in the kitchen, where younger sis lunged toward both of us, still wearing the sack. We instantly noticed it was precisely the positioning of yesterday's hallucination, mysterious massive lunging white column, in the same damn place. We lost our shit. We were already superstitious by the time our dad got home. When he walked in the room wearing an oddly greenish tee, we couldn't help but chuckle to each other. It was extremely strange, and served to fuel some pretty unhealthy delusions we were experiencing at the time. But those coincidences were so intense, I will never forget. As a high school/university student, I worked in a restaurant which was in an old Iron Masters mansion in the UK. The building itself is around 350 years old, and before it was a restaurant, it was retirement home complete with morgue in the always pitch black attic. I worked there for about 4 years part-time mostly, but full-time in the summer breaks. There would always be the feeling of never quite being alone, even if it was just me in the restaurant and a lone manager in the office. I would often hear floorboards creaking above, sounding like people walking over them, to the point I would go upstairs and investigate. In my peripheral vision, I often would catch the motion of someone turning the corner out of my sight, as if someone was walking away from me. Again, this was to the point where I would walk around the corner to ensure no customers or other staff members were there. The running joke between the staff was that the ghost was called Mary. If anyone reported anything strange, it was just brushed off as Old Mary again. One night, one of the managers organized a psychic evening. The night went as planned, and at the end of the psychic had a little Q&A. The organizing manager asked the psychic, "Do you get any vibes from this place?" The psychic replied there was an elderly lady rolling around and her name was not Mary but Elizabeth. I was working on the bar that night with one of my friends, and the manager hurried over to us in an excited manner and said, "The psychic said the ghost's name is not Mary but Elizabeth." When he said the name Elizabeth, all the power went out in the building. The only light was the emergency lighting for the fire exits and one of the Red Bull fridges, which was on a different circuit for some reason. We all stood there for about 10 seconds silently frozen, and then the power came back on. We awkwardly laughed and then carried on. After that, I always ensured I corrected people when they blamed anything strange on Mary, to Elizabeth. So me and my friend were in Scouts, camping. Around 16 years old. The site we went to had the old army-style tent you see. Looks like a mini lodge with a short pole on each corner and two long ones in the center to give it a house look. We had a tent to ourselves after putting it up. We chose a platform away from most of the group as we were older by a couple of years. It was on a hill and you could stand under the far edge of the foundation. It was a steep hill that you would have to climb up the hill and come in from one side. Going to sleep one night, me and him and just shooting the shit, sitting on our cots, and someone kicks the far end of my cot. But I was looking at it at the time, and no, I didn't see the canvas touch the cot, so it wouldn't have been someone kicking the side of the tent into my cot. Weird. Happens again a few minutes later. Think it's strange. We both go to bed. I wake up soaked. It had been raining that night, and my feet are dirty and I'm tired as fuck. My buddy starts telling me of a dream he had. I woke up, ran out of the tent, down the hill to Sam's tent and asked him, "Where's Darman? Me? At?" He pointed towards our tent, but I ran towards the bathroom. Not a minute later, Sam comes to our tent and hands me my hat and says, "You left this at my tent last night." I didn't go to his tent. He retells the whole dream my buddy had, but saying it was me that did it, not my buddy. Even saying that I, Darman, asked where's Darman. Mind you, my buddy and I look nothing alike. He easily had 100 pounds on me and I was blonde while he had brown hair. We believe we had some weird body swap thing. There is a ghost that loves my dog. I am an artist and rent a small studio that is on the second floor of an old antique store. Store is quite large, bottom is all antiques, top has a few small studios and more antiques. When the antique store is closed, the bottom floor has active alarms. There is a separate staircase and entrance to the studio section. Artists have 24-hour access. Because she is the best girl, my GSD mix comes to the studio with me. Absolutely loves when the store is open. Customers can walk around the upstairs areas. My studio is in the middle of the top floor and has two doors, one on each end, but the doors are removed. I just have dog gates. When people are around, she goes from one door to the next for pets and treats. If I am there after hours, usually early in the morning, she just chills and sleeps on her dog bed or works on a bone. The past few weeks there has been an odd occasional occurrence. We will be there around 5:30 a.m., contentedly working away, and Serene is snoozing on her bed. She will wake up from a deep sleep, run to a door, full on tail wag, butt wiggle, and level her head like when she is being petted. Ears back and flat, top of head flat, eyes looking up adoringly and a dog grin. After a moment she will break and run to the other door and repeat the process just like she does when an actual customer is petting her. The first time I thought someone else was around, so I checked, no one else there, nothing on the security camera. Witnessed this myself. My sister's cat was walking towards the door to go out of the living room. He suddenly stopped, arched his back, fur on end, and hissed at the empty doorway, before walking around 3.5 walls of the room to go out the same doorway. In the same house, I once saw a 6-foot-tall man out the corner of my eye that I thought was my brother-in-law, when in fact he wasn't home, and it turned out I was alone. Also same house, a small girl ghost had been seen by multiple people, but not me, and was known to play with my nephew's toys. Growing up there were constant strange activities in my house. Electronics would turn off and on and footsteps would be heard in empty rooms. A few times when I was home alone I heard voices. The worst/creepiest was when I was a child and fixing dinner. I needed to get something from our upstairs hall pantry. I walked towards the stairs and froze. I don't know why, but I couldn't move. I was terrified. My dog came up to me, then looked towards the stairs and started growling and showing his teeth. He also pushed me back, so he was in front of me snapping at whatever was on the stairs. It was only my father and I home. Mother and my brother were out and we lived on the second floor. Our doors were locked and no one could get in without us knowing, so whatever it wasn't human. My father came over to see why our dog was freaking out, and when I told him, he said I was being silly and went to the stairs. He got to the doorway and froze. He looked scared and told me to take the dog, go get my uncle from across the street and stay outside until he said. I did as I was told. This was almost 30 years ago. I never knew what was there. They never told me. I never felt fear like that again in that house though. My mom moved us into a new home. She was in the living room trying to hook the cable up and I was in her room roughly 10 feet away. She kept asking me to turn the TV on to see if it connected, but every time I turned it on it was loud static. When I turned the TV off after another unsuccessful attempt, there was a large solid black human-like figure standing behind me in the reflection of the TV. I was facing the only entrance and I was 100% alone in that room. It was the middle of the day, but all our curtains were closed, so it wasn't a reflection from outside. I ran like hell, and when I told my mom, she didn't believe me. My brother and I consistently had experiences over the many years we lived there. Every single night you would hear and feel someone running back and forth down the hallway. My brother and I were across the hall from each other, but we were on the opposite side of the house from my mom, behind a closed door with our only pet, a dog, R.I.P. So many nights we'd both look out our doors at the same time to see if it was the other person, but nothing. We learned to live with it as it never stopped. Another time in broad daylight, I watched my dog walk into a room we used as storage in the same hallway. I laughed and went down the hall to get him out, saying something like, "Silly boy, you can't go in there," but when I turned into the room it was empty. I was super weirded out because I watched my entire dog walk in. When I got back down the hallway, I then see my dog through our glass door fast asleep on the patio. There was no exit point from that room except a window that wouldn't really open, so it stayed closed and locked. I have so many other stories, but when my brother and I moved out, my mom finally agreed the house was haunted. She woke up in her room to a dark human-like figure standing over her. When she turned the lamp on her nightstand on, and it was gone. My childhood home didn't just have my grandma, my dog and I living in it. There were 3 other beings in the house. One was an old man who has died in my house about 40 years earlier. Me and my grandma would hear him walking around, sometimes in steel-toe boots, and one time he actually started playing country music from the 50s on a laptop that was closed and powered off. He only ever showed himself a couple of times, but never around me or my grandma, only to an aunt who had been staying in the basement. She one day asked if we had ever seen anything in the house, then told us she had seen an old man peek out at her from our laundry room. Apparently he didn't look like he was evil, just kind of looking around to see who was there. There was a spirit that never really showed itself or said anything, but it would move things to weird places, throw things across rooms, lock doors, and would also slam doors. One day my dog was outside, but I heard something downstairs. Completely forgetting my dog was outside, I called down the stairs as I was worried he was getting into something as per usual. As I called down the stairs into the pitch black basement, I heard a crystal clear low growl and kind of just ushered the dog to come upstairs by calling his name. He never came up. I was just going to go downstairs when I heard my dog howling in the front yard. No one was home, no TV was on, nothing. Safe to say I waited outside with my dog for my grandma to get home from work that day. Another one was a little girl. No one could ever see her, but me. She only ever showed herself a couple of times though. Once when I was really young, she appeared behind my door, which was wide open. She was kneeling down crying really hard. Of course I freaked out, and when my grandma came rushing in, she was no longer there. Another time she showed herself when I was in sleep paralysis. This time I could only slowly move my eyes, which led to me seeing her knelt down in the corner of my room crying. She once sent a picture from my phone of her white forehead and black hair. At the time I had blonde hair and had not sent any picture of my forehead, and no one was home or had access to my social media. Sometimes me and my grandmother would hear her crying around the house, or she would throw some things sometimes. I had a feeling she was traumatized and died at a young age due to the way she had literally brought sadness into a room. I'm tearing up just thinking about it. I had also endured my fair amount of trauma in the home, so sometimes I felt connected to her, but almost too connected for my personal comfort. I began feeling the sadness she brought with her, and I think I may have gotten an attachment from it. I am of Aboriginal descent, and one day my grandmother decided she wanted to smudge my room because activity had gotten super bad in there, and it was always at least 7 degrees colder than the rest of the home. She immediately felt a coldness in the corner and asked if that's where the little girl had been crying, and she was right. As she was smudging, I started to cry very abruptly and hard. I was nearly sobbing. My grandma had to stop smudging, then told me that the girl most likely had an attachment to me and I shouldn't have cried because in our culture and beliefs that means that you are inviting them to stay with you. My grandma died a couple of years later and I moved out of the home, but I still sometimes feel like she is with me. When I was around 18 or 19 and still living at home, I worked a late shift in a bar. One Saturday night I got home around 1 a.m. I was in the bathroom brushing my teeth when I heard a sharp knock on the door followed by a male voice telling me to hurry up in there. I just assumed it was my brother putting on a silly deep voice, so I told him to F off. I'm coming out of the bathroom and that's when it hits me, there's no one in the house. My parents were up north at some music festival and my brother was out drinking with his friends. My brother came home a couple of hours later to me in the living room watching Arrested Development, hugging the dog and trying not to have a complete breakdown. It's not that exciting a story, but unless I was having some kind of auditory hallucination or temporary bout of psychosis, never had any mental health problems before or after, it's proof enough for me. My mom never liked that house either, always got the feeling something was watching her at the top landing of the stairs, which just happens to be right where the bathroom is situated. Me and two of my siblings were home alone upstairs, and we heard the front door open, so someone went to check outside the door and I checked the porch but no one was there. We thought it was nothing so we left it, but once we sat back down we heard running downstairs in the basement and a child's voice asking, "Is someone here?" I'm looking for my mom. My brother ran downstairs and still there was nobody. Here it is normal to have a haunted house, and as our ancestors believed, we shouldn't really give the spirits any attention. So we ignored it and watched a movie till our parents came home. My nan's story of the ghost of my uncle being in her house. Bit of context, my nan was a publican for 30 years in a pub that was notorious amongst the locals for being haunted by a barmaid. My nan always has a rationale explanation for every knock, footsteps etc. that happened in the pub. After she retired, my nan and granddad bought a rather large 4-bedroom house. When her brother-in-law got sick, she allowed my aunt to move in with him so my man could help her. Long story short, he ended up not getting better and passing away. My aunt then moved out to live on her own. A few years later, my nan was doing her spring cleaning downstairs. She found the receipts for a navy blue jumper. She was 100% certain that my granddad didn't own it and could work out for the life of her where the receipt come from. Not long afterwards she heard footsteps come from upstairs and my uncle wearing a navy blue jumper come walking down the stairs. When I was 13 I experienced the ghost of my grandmother. She died in her sleep while taking a nap on the living room couch. Afterwards, according to my father and grandfather, every now and then they could hear her make the trip from the bedroom to the kitchen and open the refrigerator door. A trip she made many times when she was alive. At first I thought my father and grandfather were making this up, having fun at my expense. A couple years after she passed away, my father and I went to spend the weekend with my grandfather. My father and I slept on the living room couch. It opened into a double bed. The same couch my grandmother died on. My grandfather left the house to go to a next-door neighbor's house to play poker. My father and I went to bed in the living room. My father went right to sleep. I laid awake, reading a magazine. After a while I heard the noise of the back bedroom door being pulled open. I heard the sound of shuffling feet. I heard the creak in the floor directly in front of the bathroom doorway. I heard more shuffling feet. Then I heard the fridge door being pulled open and I heard the sound of glass bottles in the fridge door clinking against each other. Back then they were still putting soft drinks in glass bottles. Feeling thirsty, I decide to get out of bed and go join my grandfather in the kitchen for a cold drink. I go into the kitchen only to find myself all alone. I was puzzled. I could have sworn I heard my grandfather walk from the bedroom into the kitchen and open the fridge. Then I remembered that my grandfather wasn't home. He was over the neighbor's house and he hadn't come back yet. Then I remembered my grandfather's and father's ghost stories. Then I got scared. I raced from the kitchen, into the living room and leapt over my sleeping father into my side of the bed. Then I went to sleep. I don't know how long I slept before I woke up with a start, a feeling of paralyzing fear in my body. I was frozen. I was lying on my right side. It took a while for me to work up the courage to turn my head to the left. My head was covered by my blanket. There was a shadow being cast onto my blanket. The shadow was the outline of a head and shoulders of a woman with a beehive hairdo. My grandmother used to always have a beehive hairdo even years after it went out of style, up until she died. I heard heavy breathing coming from the shadow. I had to work up the courage to move one of my hands to remove the blanket off of my face. When I did, in an instant, the paralyzing fear I felt was gone. The shadow was gone. The sound of heavy breathing was gone. My father was still sleeping. I pulled the blanket back over my head and went back to sleep. Only to wake up again on my right side. The paralyzing fear was back. Forcing myself to turn my head. The shadow was back. The heavy breathing was back. Again I had to summon up all my courage to move my hand to take my blanket off my face, only to find nothing there and the paralyzing fear gone. I went through this same routine the entire night. I lost count of how many times this happened through the night. Maybe a dozen. Maybe more. But it happened a lot. The next morning I told my father what happened to me throughout the entire night while he slept. The sounds of the bedroom door opening. The shuffling feet. The fridge door opening. Nobody in the kitchen. Being awakened with a paralyzing fear. The shadow. The heavy breathing. The repeat performances throughout the night. I kind of expected him to tell me that I was just seeing and hearing things. But instead he smiled and exclaimed, "That was Grandma." So we live in South Africa and I was 8 years old when I was in my room that's situated halfway down a long hallway. At round 7 a.m. my father had a closed Bible on his bedside. Keep in mind he was not religious, it was more of a habit to have it, when he started swearing at something in his room out of the top of his lungs. He jumped out of bed and grabbed a bat under the bed, and as he was aiming to hit whatever he saw there, I heard footsteps coming from his side of the hallway running past my open door towards our kitchen with my dad about 5 seconds behind it, and as he turned the corner into the kitchen he came across an empty room. Confused and breathing heavy he walked back up to my room to check on me, and he looked like the dead. He was in bed and the Bible flipping open on the bedside table, and as he turned around to check it he saw a blurry figure tearing the Bible pages and ran towards the hallway when he confronted it or tried. 2 days after that I was sleeping in the room on the floor while watching TV and felt something looking at me from the cabinet side. I proceeded to open my eyes and there it was, the most undescribable figure with massive eyes against the cabinet looking at me. I could not move at all and tried to scream as my mother was on the bed napping too, but for about 30 seconds I was helpless and scared looking at this 8-foot figure staring at me, and it vanished when my dad was coming down the hallway to go to bed. Now I never told a soul about that night as I could not explain it. Now years later in my late 30s I can tell you the closest thing I can match up what I saw was, and you probably won't know what it looks like till you Google it, but it is a puppet used in a kids show called Woofles from Pumpkin Patch. Go Google that thing. So, I told this my mother a while ago because it's one of my best childhood memories. My grandmother passed away 10 years ago, and I still talk about her a lot because I grew up with her and my aunt and loved her immensely. The memory in question is me combing my GMO's hair that was super long with beautiful black and white shadings. I clearly remember going with the comb from the top of her head all the way down to the tips and saying that I wish to have the same hair when I get old. I was maybe 5 or 6 then, not sure, but it's still vivid in my mind like it was yesterday. We talked during the time I combed her hair before I got called by my friends to play outside. We did this almost twice a week. Well, my mom looked at me confused and sighed that my grandmother never had hair this long. She hated long hair and the longest ever she saw it was chute length. The one I remember went way down until the hips and no chance I mixed it up. She then took an old photo of my grandmother and showed it to me. You can guess, her hair was very long, and from the black and white photo, you could see the shades of it like I remembered. My mom then tells me that they always wondered why I spent so much time in my grandmother's room alone and talking to myself, but they thought I was playing with puppets and didn't question further. Looks like I met my grandmother, who my mom says passed away too early from an abusive husband, and apparently my aunt experienced the same, but upon asking, she says she doesn't remember anymore. Either way, I still think of these moments and they always bring a smile on my face. My mom, sister and I were driving around showing my sister the locations around town. She was visiting. We stopped by this abandoned school. Apparently something tragic had happened there that caused a lot of children's lives to be lost. I don't really remember what it was, but it happened years ago. On the outside it was just a typical old school building. But it had this off feeling about it. Like an uneasy stillness in the air. My mom told the story of what happened and I kind of just zoned out. Then as we go to leave, my dog, who was with us, starts to get up and glare out the window. He bares his teeth and growls. My dog never growls unless you try to take his bone from him. He's a small Yorkie mix who sleeps and barely moves 90% of the time. He never barks. But he just stared at a spot around the school and growled. They always say dogs see things we do not. Really spooked me because he now does this at home too. He'll stare at a spot and start growling. I've had a few paranormal experiences, but 2 in particular stand out. First one was when I was a child in the 70s. My parents had friends and some of our relatives over one evening. They occasionally played with tarot cards and Ouija boards in these little parties. Nothing intense, no candles or anything. Mom said usually whatever the Ouija board said was usually didn't make sense, like the spirit that they talked to more than once that claimed to have been a Viking and was an ancestor of my mom. We didn't have Viking ancestors, so it was never taken seriously whatsoever. Well, I guess one night whatever they talked to was something dark and it made Mom uncomfortable and they all stopped playing and it got put away in the game closet. Well, 2 days later the Ouija board caught on fire. Just the Ouija board. And that's why Ouija boards became forbidden in our household. Oh, and last year, we did indeed discover we had some Viking ancestors while doing our genealogy. Second story was in the 90s. I worked in a Toys R Us that everyone said was haunted. We couldn't hardly keep an overnight crew because of it. We were doing a bit of a remodel and I was put in charge of an overnight crew of about 12 people. In about 2 weeks all but 2 had quit. So one night it's me and one of the 2 that hadn't quit. The other one had called in sick or had the day off or something. So it was just me and her locked in overnight. All night it was super uneventful. We go to take our lunch break and we're sitting there at the table in the break room eating. Suddenly a penny falls between us. Then a second one. Then a third. Now at the time I had a coworker who was something of a prankster. So I looked up expecting to see that he or someone else had wedged pennies into the ceiling tiles. Nope. No pennies. Then another one falls and a few more. It freaking started raining pennies. We ran out of there and listened at the door. A little while after it got quiet in there we went back in and pennies were everywhere. All over the table, the floor, the couch. She quit on the spot. I still have a jar with all those pennies. It was almost $3 worth of pennies. So when I was around 8 years old I moved into an apartment with my mom and brother. My mom and brother weren't the nicest people in the world, so I was already very sensitive to the mood of environments around me. Immediately walking into this apartment for the first time I knew something was off. I figured it was me being nervous about a new place and thought nothing of it. We lived there for 4 years and in those 4 years I noticed a horrible rotting smell. Like a decomposing animal smell. We checked out the attic, we were on the 3rd floor, and found nothing. Had maintenance check it out and also found absolutely nothing. And the smell continued going away and coming back randomly. Of our bathroom doors would sometimes sound like someone banging on them randomly despite no one being in the bathroom or even near the door. I also had a Nintendo 3DS at the time and I took a picture one night randomly messing with the camera on it and I saw a picture of a blue phantom figure staring right back into the camera at me and I was absolutely terrified and didn't sleep well for days after that. Another time I was watching the show 16 in my room alone and I heard a man's laugh right next to my ear as if someone was laughing in my ear. Changed the channel and still heard it but only louder and I could almost feel someone's breath in my ear as they did it. And there's many other stories. However, the absolute last straw for me and my family was when we were all watching TV one night in the living room. All of our doors were shut at the time and we heard one of the doors open, then the sound of someone running down the hallway stopping right in the living room. After that we got a hotel and broke our lease because it was terrifying. We did some digging after and found out a man had apparently beat his wife to death in that apartment and then unalived himself a few days later. The apartment complex failed to mention this to us, among other shady things, but that's a different story. I'm 20 now and a lot of it still scares me to think about. Easy. The home I live in. We have paranormal activity in the home off and on. The most significant events I can remember lasted over a 2-year period where I owned a dead woman's shirt. For context, my dad's best friend lost his wife about 7 years before I was gifted the shirts. There were 2. One was her favorite, and the other was the shirt she was in when she lost her battle to cancer. Why did he keep that one? I wish I knew. From minute 1 I knew there was something wrong in the house. I walked in from school one day and didn't even have to look at the shirts to know something was in my house that shouldn't be there. The activity centered around the shirts. People got sick holding the red one, the one she passed in, nausea, migraines, anxiety spikes. I wouldn't tell them anything about the shirt. They would grab it from my closet and start feeling sick within a few minutes. The other shirt was fine and had a calming energy to it. Well, the activity started when I started feeling watched. I couldn't sleep in my room anymore. I already had issues with sleeping in my room but had resolved them up until that point. Things would move and disappear and show up in random places a week later, like my makeup showing up in my closet or my glasses being in the laundry room. I started having weird vague dreams where I had no face. There was one dream I had where something turned all the lights off, and when I woke up the lights all turned on. I had 3 bouts of sleep paralysis while owning these shirts and never had a history of it before. I had my hair yanked several times. I started hearing something mimic my parents' footsteps and voices and coughing when I was alone in the home. Like I remember walking past the master bedroom and hearing my mom cough, only to find the room empty and her car gone. On multiple occasions I woke up to my name being spoken in my ear, and once what sounded like someone clapping. When my dad's friend passed away last year, I grabbed the shirt his wife died in and placed it under his arm and held his hand until he passed. The activity has since stopped. R.I.P. Doug and Danny, but at least you're together now in the afterlife and she's not causing problems in my house anymore. I was in high school, and it was summertime, so I was up late watching TV in the basement. I decided to go to bed, so I turned the TV off, walked across the basement, flipped off the lights, and was halfway up the stairs when the TV turned back on. I didn't bother going back to turn it off. Ran straight upstairs to my room. In hindsight, the power button probably got stuck on the remote when I turned the TV off, but was creepy at the time. Especially when you are halfway up the stairs with a dark basement at your back. My aunt and uncle in Japan lives in an apartment complex with mostly elderly residents, think seniors community, so deaths due to age were a regular occurrence. The complex is said to be extremely haunted, to the point that people just accept seeing paranormal things as normal, ghosts wandering the premise, things moving by themselves. My uncle invited a friend over one night to drink, and as it got late into the night, the friend decided it was time for him to go home. Being unfamiliar with the layout, there were two elevators. One elevator was for normal use, the other was for maintenance use, often to carry the bodies of the elderly deceased away. He was drunk and entered into that elevator. Suddenly the elevator closed and the lights started turning on and off. The elevator would move extremely fast up and down, never stopping at any floor. My uncle's friend was so freaked out by this as it went on and on for some period of time. He began to cry, got on his knees and begged the ghost to let him off and he will never get in this elevator again. Just as he said that out loud, the elevator stops and the door opens. My spouse and I lived in this house that my grandparents owned. Mama swears up and down there is a ghost in the house, but not a scary one. I figured, she's just being her weird self, okay. We start living there and we didn't have a pantry, so cans went in cupboards and bread on the counter. We kept waking up to find the bread on the floor. Almost every day. Rats? Ike. We start putting the bread in other places. On the table. Desk. Other counters. It didn't happen as much, but we did still find the damn bread on the floor on occasion. Fast forward to the midnight release of a game. Spouse and I stay up late playing it and the bread just fucking slides off the counter and onto the floor. We are both sitting at our desks playing the game. There were no pets or anything in the house and our one yo was asleep in her room. Now I'm not saying there are bread ghosts, but we definitely had a bread ghost. So this happened before my best friend, we'll call him Jordan, died, maybe like 2 or 3 months before, I can't exactly remember, it was almost 3 years ago, but their oldest dog had finally kicked the bucket after living more than 10 years. Well, since Jordan was wheelchair bound and his mom was devastated from it happening suddenly, I was the one who buried her in the backyard. As I'm putting the last of the dirt on top of her, I see a white little blur out of the corner of my eye, then I see it come up to the pile and make out the figure of the pup. She sniffed at the pile, then looked right at me with a concerned look. After a couple of seconds she was gone and I asked Jordan's mom if she had seen what I did. To my surprise she didn't, since she also had a couple of ghost stories she had told me in the past. This isn't my only experience seeing something others can't, but it's the one that lingers the most because of the connection to Jordan passing away. This happened when I was a kid, like around 10. We have a garden with many trees and behind the garden is an empty plot of land. It has wild trees. Me and my brother and sister, used to like playing around the trees and climb the wall connecting the empty plot and our garden. One day a weird bird that looked like a miniature version of eagle was sitting on the trees of the empty plot. It looked like it was made of wood, but obviously it alive as it hopped from branch to branch. We were very curious as we weren't sure about its species, so we started an argument. I said it was an eagle, but my siblings said it can't be cause it was too small. When we were arguing we heard a strange voice. It said it was hungry. We started looking around to see who was speaking, but we saw no one. The voice came again and said, "You guys decide among yourselves who am I going to eat." It was then we realized that it was the weird bird that was speaking. We were pretty cowardly, all 3 of us ran away from there. A loud voice came from behind us, boom, and I woke up from my sleep. Anyways, it wasn't just a normal dream, cause all 3 of us, me and my siblings, had the same dream. We were so fucking scared, and the most scary thing is that we saw that bird sitting on a tree in our garden that very day. We avoided our garden for months. When I was maybe 5 or 6, my mother decided she wanted to go visit a family grave and make sure no one damaged the grave. My mother took me, my father, and my father's grandparents to the cemetery with her, and she spent almost an hour cleaning up the grave and the area around it, then planted some new flowers. After all of that, my mother and father were packing up, getting ready to leave the cemetery. As they were walking back to the car, I was screaming horribly for them to get back into the car because there was a man all in white coming to get them. My grandparents tried to calm me down, but I would not have it, so my mother and father started running to the car to see what was going on, and I kept screaming for them to get in or else the man would hurt us. Weird thing is, no one else saw this but me, and my mother has always told me that I was panicking pretty bad and refused to go into any cemetery after that incident. This is a story that my uncle told me. When he used to live in Mexico, he was coming home from a party and he was pretty drunk. While trying to walk home alone, he runs into a guy who's riding a horse and wearing kind of like a mariachi outfit, and the guy on the horse asks my uncle if he wants to hop on his horse to take him home for free. But my uncle decided to decline the offer and told the guy he was okay. The guy on the horse offers his again, but again, my uncle said no and that he was fine. The guy in the horse said it was fine and stayed there. My uncle continued walking, and once he turned around, the guy on the horse completely vanished. It turns out he met the devil, and that it's a person called El Charro Negro who wanted my uncle to sell his soul to the devil. Once he told me that story, it made my skin crawl, and I'll forever be careful in the night. When I was 15, we moved into my grandpa's flat. He lived in a small village in Cordoba, Spain, and we lived there for 2 years while our current home was built. There was a time when I had a very weird dream every night. I was laying in my bed and I opened my eyes. My lamp was on and there was a man watching me next to the door. The door was closed, he was inside the room. I could see his body but not his face, just the shape of his head. He was bald. When I saw him, I was not scared. I felt sleepy and my brain wasn't functioning right. The man was knocking at the door, which was weird, since he was already inside. At some point, I told him to come in. Then he yelled, "Aquí te espero. I wait for you here," in Spanish. At that point I woke up and my room was normal, lights off, no strange man. I had that dream at least once a week for several months. I'm not sure if this is something paranormal or not, it could be just a dream. It felt somehow different from a dream. I wouldn't know how to describe it, but it was like I was awake and hallucinating more than dreaming. I think my eyes were open at least. So my friends and I were into studying witchcraft, the occult. We were mostly just into studying it because it was interesting, not actually practicing anything. One guy in our group wanted to try a summoning ritual. He brought animal bones, a crow skull, and candles and laid them out in a really specific pattern. He lit the candles and started to chant. There was a sudden stench like rotten eggs in the air, and the room got hazy. Suddenly a very large shadow loomed on the wall behind us. Like it was so tall it even covered part of the ceiling. The air seemed heavy and a feeling of pure dread seemed to fill the room. Then all the candles snuffed out at once and we all ran for our lives. We stopped inviting that friend. When I used to work late second shift, I would get home around 1 in the morning. There were always weird things happening in my apartment, but this was the weirdest that happened. But first I'll share some of the weird things. On multiple occasions my wife and I would hear loud banging noises as if there were someone upstairs drunkenly walking around. We always assumed it was our neighbor who was a heavy alcoholic, but he wouldn't be home most of the times we heard it. We also had one of those stackable washer-dryer combos, and anyone who's ever had one knows how high up the washer lid needs to be to latch open. Well, dozens of times we would start the washer only to have it stop halfway through the cycle with the lid open and latch to the bottom of the dryer part. I thought maybe because it rocked back and forth it was an old shitty washer. Same with the whole place, a real slum run by a slumlord, that it just popped open. No possible way for that to happen unless the damn thing nearly fell face flat and then popped itself back upright. We also had a hanging light in the upstairs area by the kitchen. This light is part of my main story, that would randomly sway back and forth as if someone gently tapped on it. There were always big trucks driving by and going down the back alley parking lot we had, so I assumed the vibrations from them going by could cause it to sway. Well, it started to sway more and more, as if someone walked by and gave it a good rap to get it to swing. Nothing that the vibrations from big trucks could do, otherwise our cabinet doors and items on the wall would have been knocked over. This kept up for a few months, with it getting slightly stronger of sways and the weeks went on. My wife even captured it swinging on her phone one night after she got out of the shower and messaged me at work asking if I was home because it was swaying as if someone ran into it. So, I just get home from work. I believe it was around 1:30 a.m. I got home this time. I get inside, I change out of my work clothes, head back upstairs where the TV, Xbox, and hanging light are. I get myself a snack and start playing some video games to unwind from work. I forget exactly which game it was, either Smite or COD. I had the hanging light on. It had a sliding dimmer switch that controlled the brightness when on. I had it at the lowest light setting, a nice relaxing dim light. I was in the middle of my match and something compelled me to look to my right where the kitchen, light switch, and hanging light were. I sat there and as I was looking in that direction I watched as the sliding light slide all the way to high setting and the hanging light illuminated all the way up. I finished my match and went to investigate, maybe thinking the spring inside was busted or that something was amiss with the switch. It was fine, just as it had always been. It took more than just a teeny bit of force to move the slider. I studied abroad in Rome, Italy when I was 22. I lived on the 7th floor of an apartment building with 6 girls, one of them who is my best friend and stayed in the same room as me. My parents came to visit me during spring break. This doesn't add much to the story, but it is important. I am an extremely light sleeper and my roommate snored pretty loud, so I slept with earplugs in every night. One night during that spring break week, I was dead asleep and in my dream I felt someone grabbing my foot. I woke up and thought it was my roommate messing with me, but I didn't open my eyes. I just said her name and told her to knock it off. It stopped for a couple minutes but then started again. It felt like someone was pinching the ball of my foot, like trying to get a better grip on it. I woke up again pissed off cause I thought it was my roommate again, but when I looked, she was dead asleep. I looked down at the bottom of my bed and saw a full-bodied person standing there. I yanked my foot back and they just walked out of the room. I wasn't really as scared as I thought, but I was wide awake and just very in shock. The weirdest part was that on my parents' flight back to the US, my mom told me how she sat next to a psychic medium who told her how she really loved Rome, but one thing that she noticed was how many spirits were around, especially in the Colosseum and places like that. She couldn't even go near them because it was so overwhelming. And then she told my mom, this is gonna sound weird, but someone dead is trying to contact your family, or someone in your family. I'm pretty indifferent on how much I believe or don't believe in psychic mediums, but I did think it was pretty freaky considering what had happened to me the night before and that my mom never even told this woman about it. Oh, my favorite one. My wife, some work colleagues and I went to a haunted abandoned horse farm where the original family were all murdered by the father. We went to this place too and played with a Ouija board. The demon that came to the board wanted us to play in the dye room. It was called this because someone spray painted dye all over the walls. We went to the neighboring room. Roof caving in, walls had holes so big you can walk through, floor had the tiles coming up and twisted to shit. I leaned against the wall because I didn't like how the ceiling was caving. Already spooked. New place, being religious and terrified. Not at all a thrill ride. Something grabs me on the ass. Like a handful of cheek grabbing. Panic. Return to original room with board. Everyone is on it. Ask said demon, was that you who grabbed me? It replies yes, weak and afraid. Worst night. I was at FT. SIL for my MOS school, and while I never actually saw anything super crazy, so many other Marines in the barracks have seen or heard weird shit. The only times that I've personally experienced something was during Firewatch. My first experience was either during the Thanksgiving '96 or when we were about to go on leave for Christmas. Regardless, I was doing my Firewatch shift 0000 to 0400 ERC, and I kept having the sensation of someone watching me as I mindlessly roved around the deck. I wasn't scared or anything, but I was slightly on edge and weirded the fuck out. Around 0200 to 0300 though, shit got weird. I distinctly remember hearing someone make a quiet but audible ha right behind me next to my ear, almost as if they're blowing air onto a window. It didn't help that I felt a slight cold shiver go down my neck and back after that. I noped the fuck out of that side of the hallway and decided to stay on the side that actually had light for the rest of my shift. Another time when I picked up class, I was outside roving around with someone. One thing you should know about the Mardet Battery Barracks is that we're literally less than 50 feet away from the base cemetery, more on that in a bit. When me and my partner passed by the cemetery, we both saw a flashing light. At first I thought it was just a soldier fucking with us, but then the light would stay perfectly still. We ignored it the first time, but on our second and third pass, we saw the same light and it stayed exactly as it was. A small part of me wanted to go see what it was, but I wasn't about to run the risk of getting possessed or whatever. Other Marines have also told me stories about what they've seen and heard in the barracks. One of my buddies at the time told me that he and his roommate were in bed about to go to sleep when their door suddenly opened on its own, slammed shut, and locked itself. The cemetery apparently had a resident Satanist visited every now and then. When I was a new join who just arrived, I thought the guys who've been there a while longer were just fucking with me, but they were dead serious. They told me it became such a problem that the PLT, SGTS and BG had to give a brief about it to the battery a month or so before me and my group came to the battery. A decent amount of Marines have tried to kill themselves in some of the rooms over the years. Fort Sill sucks ass, fuck that place. When I was first checking in and getting my room, the clerk said that my room was supposedly haunted because some dude either tried to hang himself or cut his wrist. Ever since then, according to them, everyone who's ever occupied that particular room has either been dropped from a class or had some other dumb misfortune fall upon them. I didn't believe it at first since I was just a new join at the time and I thought that the clerks were just fucking with me, but my attitude changed when just a month later, after coming back from Christmas leave, I popped positive for COVID. That basically forced me to get dropped from the class that I was supposed to originally pick up with. One of my CPLS told me that when he went through the schoolhouse, during his firewatch shift, he was out on the quad. He looked at the cemetery and saw a woman in white with noticeable facial features stare back at him. He thought he was just tired, but the woman stuck around for a bit and it scared the shit out of him. A second later, the woman suddenly disappeared after he blinked. When I was a teenager, my dad taught me about something called witching the baby. And about witching in general. It's a knack that some people have, you either have it or you don't, you can't learn it. It seems to run in families, because he, my brother, and myself can do it. The basic idea is that you take a golden ring, hang it from a piece of string and hold it over a pregnant woman's stomach, and the ring will start to swing. If it swings in a circle, it's a girl. If it swings in a line, it's a boy. You can also hold the ring over a woman's wrist to find out the gender of the children she's had in the past, or above a person's head to tell what gender they are. Now, it's just a folk suspicion, right? My dad learned it from his mum, who grew up in the Hebrides in Scotland, and it's exactly the kind of hedge magic you'd get people believing in over time based on confirmation bias. Thing is, I've personally seen cases of it working defiance of outside factors. I told one of my teachers about it in high school, and she asked me to demonstrate. So I did it on her, using the over-the-wrist version. It came out completely accurate, swung in a line a couple of times, then stopped, then swung in a circle, then stopped. She'd had a boy first, and then a girl. She had a photo of her kids on her desk, so I knew she had two. But I'd never looked close at it, so at the time I had thought that both kids were boys. So it couldn't have been me unconsciously influencing the witching. I had been wrong, but the witching had been right. I'm a magnet for the paranormal. I've seen a black shadow appear in my kitchen and cover the entire floor and disappear into thin air. I've had my legs pulled at night while sleeping. I've seen things move on their own. I've seen a small flying creature that I'm sure was a fairy. All of these things have happened in different places. That's why I think it's me that attract the paranormal. I have too many stories. What really freaks me out is witches. When I was living in Mexico for a few years, my husband took me to see witches jump. That's just what they call it in Spanish. It is believed that witches can transform into some sort of ball of fire or light. We went to a canyon at night that's in a very remote area, and we saw the balls of fire jumping all across the canyon. Sometimes they would disappear and appear again somewhere else. This also happens around hills or mountains, and I've seen it happen there too. One of the women's dorms at Concordia, Nebraska is built on top of a Native American burial mound, and there are rumors of people seeing spirits walking the halls occasionally and various electronics going haywire. Along with that dorm, I was in a class once and one of my classmates told our instructor she heard what sounded like children playing in Founders Hall, which is mostly unoccupied with the exception of various theater workshops. The upper two levels are sealed off because it's a health hazard. He just looked at her and said she was the 8th person to tell him that. I got up one night cause I swear I heard the car start up. I ran downstairs, I flung the door open and car was cold to the touch. So I decided to get myself a glass of water. While drinking, something caught my eye in the garden. I could see a hand on my sister's netball post and some eyes. The problem was they looked reflected, like how cat eyes are. And they were looking directly at me. I freaked and ran to turn off the lights and duck down. I'll always remember my heart pounding like hell. I crawled out the kitchen and back into my room. I armed myself with a hockey stick and waited upstairs for any noise. My parents found me sat at the top of the stairs, hugging my hockey stick when they got home. I nearly took my dad's head off in a panic. When I was 16, my grandma died. We were extremely close and it devastated me. A few weird things happened surrounding her death. The morning she passed, I was standing at my bathroom sink and thought Dad just wanted Grandma to die with dignity. It felt like the thought had almost been placed in my head. Well, we got a call about 10 minutes later from her nursing home that she had passed. 2 weeks later, the day of her funeral, I had a bout of sleep paralysis that was truly strange. It started off with a dream that a dismembered hand was crawling around my house. Then when I was finally awake, I couldn't move as I watched a black mass crawl across my ceiling. My house is haunted, and I've had my fair share of experiences. But this one I really can't explain, but it's real. It was 11 p.m. and I was living upstairs at that time, and I was just laying there on my phone and I looked at my closet, which was shut, and it was pretty dark in my old room. All of the sudden my bed shakes for 30 seconds and then stops, then shakes for 10 more seconds. It literally shook, and I thought it might have been an earthquake or the train near my house, I live a little bit away from the train tracks, not walking distance, but it would take like maybe 5 to 10 minutes to get there by walking. But once it happened, I froze and texted my younger sister, which caused her to get her phone from the bathroom and rush into my room. I slept in her room, but I kept having this image in my head where there was a decaying body in there, a little boy's decaying body. After I told my parents, they were shocked, but my dad believed that my closet was a way that the ghosts were coming in and out, and they just wanted me to open it for them. It scared me so much, and I still think about it often. My own experience: woke up in the middle of the night with my parents since I was youngish then. One night saw a woman at the end of the bed stood staring at me, then she walked through the wall, so I told my parents and they both shit themselves, not literally. Then for the time that we lived at that house we used to hear scratching in the walls, things being thrown downstairs in the kitchen. This might have been my imagination, or maybe I just misremember, but when I was 5 or 6, I went for my afternoon sleep, but I wasn't able to fall asleep, so I was just staring on a pack of tissues. It was dark in the room, so I already couldn't see clearly, when the space around the tissues became even less clear and suddenly they just disappeared. I looked everywhere, but I couldn't find them. I have quite a few stories, but some that happened to me were: I was around 18 or 19 at the time, and I woke up because my ex-girlfriend wasn't feeling good because of her period. So I decided I'd go and give her some chocolate to help her period pains, but when I was messaging her it got really cold in my room and there was handprints moving closer to me. I threw the sheets off and ran downstairs, but as I got halfway down the stairs I heard a faint whisper in my left ear trying to tell me something, but I couldn't make it out. I got to the bottom of the stairs and ran to the couch, then I saw dog prints or handprints again, but couldn't exactly see what it was, just that it was something. I ran outside, grabbed my bike and biked in the pouring rain over to my ex-girlfriend's house. I told her about it and gave her the chocolate, then I biked back home. This all started at 3 a.m. and I was home by 5 a.m. and everything was quiet by then. Gah! Where to begin? I've been having paranormal experiences since Elle was a teenager. And I'm not a very superstitious person, or at least, Elle wasn't. But too many things have happened in my life that Elle can't really explain. I have many experiences, but I'll just leave my most prominent here. I had been suffering from insomnia for a long time, hadn't had a good night's sleep for nearly 3 years, until one night Elle passed out almost as soon as my head hit the pillow. I had intense nightmares all night, none of which Elle can remember, but Elle woke up with 5 long scratches along my arm that perfectly matched what a hand could do. I would run my fingers along them a lot, thinking how similar it was. They were weird though. Elle woke up with them, but it looked like they'd been there for days, all scabbed over and shit, but Elle no, they weren't there before Elle had fallen asleep. Okay, maybe Elle accidentally scratched myself in my sleep, but they refused to heal. I'm a very fast healer, always have been, but these 5 little scratches lasted for months. I remember thinking how weird it was that they wouldn't heal, and even my friends started pointing out how long they lasted. They didn't hurt at all, but Elle remember some time later Elle felt a weird presence in my bathroom, and it felt very angry. I asked why it was so mad, and Elle never got a response, but it left me alone after that. One of many experiences, but it was my most tangible one. I have seen ghosts since I can remember. The first was when I must have been about 3, because my sis was very young, and I regularly would wake up and see what I thought was my nan. She lived in my parents' house also. She was usually walking into my room and would be sort of peering as if to see me better in the dark of night. I would say nan and she would instantly vanish. I would always wonder how she was able to do that. Like I said, I was 3. Anyway, around 15 years later I was flicking through old photo albums when suddenly the lady I thought was my grandmother was right there. I was freaked out, not least because I somehow just knew it was the lady that used to look at me. It frightened the shit out of me, and it turns out that it was indeed my great-grandmother. She had died in that house 12 long years before I was born. 100% real spirit. So this time I lived in an apartment with my mom. I had a imaginary friend. That time I did not know English because I'm Mexican. I named Mr. Cans, so my mother did not know that much English, and he asked a Freems what Mr. Cans meant. He said why was cans. When my mom asked me how he looked, why said he looked like a homeless man dragging a bag full of cans and with a big white beard. After that my mom did research and found out that in my apartment a man with that low-case suicide, and yes, we lived in the 5th floor. Then my mom installed cameras for a private reason. We saw how things started moving. For last I now moved to Mexico. I forgot I had this friend. Now that I remember him I think, why did I see him? This is my story. At 7, a lot of crazy things happened to me at 7. I was sleeping in my bed at my grandparents' house. My bed was in my grandparents' room. It faced the hallway and the door was open, and woke up real early. I looked out into the hallway and saw a figure. It was a girl who was almost transparent, had long hair. She was like what most ghost girls look like in horror movies. Basically every time I blinked she got closer, inexplainable. Eventually I realized how close she was and got scared and get into my grandparents' bed and woke up my grandma. I told her about it and she believed me since she believes in spirits. This is the only paranormal event I experienced that I can't explain. I've always been very skeptical of these kind of stories, but I became more open to them after I received my own. So me and my girlfriend at the time drove out in the middle of the desert at night. It was a dirt road I was familiar with, away from people and not visible from any roads. I turned off the car and the lights. We decided to get in the backseat to talk. I decided the best way for me to communicate was standing halfway out of the back passenger side door. So all doors were closed besides the back passenger side where I was, and the front passenger door was just cracked. So just after a few minutes, all of a sudden it felt like the car got hit with a strong downward force and the lights turned on at the exact same time and the cracked door swung open. My lights were operated by a sliding switch that needs to be placed just right in the middle. I always left it off. I immediately stood up expecting to see someone standing there or running away. Instead, I was even more shocked to see nothing there. It was completely dead silent and so eerie. It wasn't a very dark night, I could still see decently far. I stood there for a minute not moving, just looking around trying to make sense of what just happened. Finally my girlfriend asked to leave, so we drove away. She wasn't as surprised as I was. She always told me of paranormal experiences she had. After we drove away she asked me if I believed her stories now. When I was around 6 I would always wake up in the middle of the night at 2 to find myself looking face to face with something I can only tell looks like a lost soul. This would continue to happen at night, but once I started to get older I'd find myself facing more physical encounters. I would now find myself during the day eating or laying down and I would hear something whispering into my ears telling me what to do as if I was a puppet and they were my master. I find half the time my cups would move on their own halfway across the tables. Nothing can compare to what I dealt with when I was 13. It was around 12 and I was laying in bed. I found myself thirsty, so I went to my kitchen to grab myself some water with the lights on. A few seconds before I could shut the lights off, something dropped all of the keys off of a hanger we had in the kitchen and it made a huge crashing sound. I was so scared I ran back to my room without turning the lights off. Later on that night I'd find myself laying in my bed reading some books with my lights on. Sadly back then I didn't have a lock on my door yet, so my parents could come in and out as they pleased. Around 2 a.m. I was laying and I heard footsteps coming up the stairs, but I thought nothing of it because my older sister's room is in the basement. Before the thing even hit the second step you could hear it heavily run up the stairs and run down the hallway. My soul almost left my body when my lights flickered off and entire bed began to shake vigorously as my door slowly opened as I saw the same figure standing in front of it staring at me as I panicked. After that night I've never slept alone again. It happened to me like 4 years ago. I was dreaming, I think. I happened my eyes and there were toys and Legos and superheroes everywhere. It was my brother's room. I got out of bed. Wait, he got out of bed. I had no control over his body, it's like if I was seeing with his eyes. He went to his door and shouted, "Mom," no answer. He then looked at my bedroom door and started to open it. All this, while I'm asleep, it was a dream. He then opened my door and entered in my room. He knows that I don't want him to enter, but he does it anyway. He then walked next to me and started looking at me. Like 2 seconds later, I opened my eyes and turned around. My brother was next to me fixing me like a creep. I screamed and remember my dream. I screamed even more, waking up my mom. It is not easy to explain, but over the years I have come to refine what they call gift, as being a kind of conduit, or an easy target for certain energies to be present. I go into trance mode, not like a movie tied to a chair or turning my head, and, at the drop of a hat, I start talking or sharing things like, "Hey mom, your grandmother says," or is showing me a silver-plated comb and a little box that looks like a compact. I don't recognize it, but it has a similar plating to the comb. It gives me the idea that there must be makeup powder inside, but it doesn't make sense to me. This was a few weeks ago and my mother didn't understand the message. A couple of days ago, talking to my grandmother, she mentioned what I told her. My grandmother clarified that although my great-grandmother had a jewelry box, she kept her most intimate treasures in that compact. My grandmother never got to see them, but she told my mother that she used to share tea with her, while she was dying of breast cancer when my mother was 6 years old, and more than once, my grandmother looked out the door and saw my mama showing the contents to my mother. Her favorite granddaughter. Anyway, this is a bit too long, but I meant to introduce myself. For a couple of years, I was very unwell and addicted to a specific hypnotic medicine, Ambien. Plus, I have petit mal, which I usually use as a clinical excuse for certain things I see or perceive in order to explain them. During that time, my cat, Theo, stopped sleeping at the foot of my bed, and by the end of the year, he was no longer sleeping in the room. At that time, and genuinely without any conscious knowledge at least, for more than a year I woke up every night at 3:33 a.m. and being fearful as I am, not knowing that this was a popular time, I didn't fall asleep until 4 a.m. anyway. During one of those waits, I don't know the exact time, but at least 3:40 a.m., I felt scared. The room became very chilly, and I started to pray. I am a baptized Catholic but a practicing Buddhist for the last 15 years. At that moment, I felt like something was pulling me by my ankles, and almost knocking me out of bed. I don't know if it was hands, but it was a force that I applied more to my right ankle than my left ankle. When I become aware of this, my temperature returns to normal, and trying to calm down I say aloud I'm sure I was asleep, when I was sure I wasn't. No sooner do I say that than I see to my right a black hand coming out of my wardrobe, and in front of me was a bookcase. The bookcase makes a clack or something similar, and as I look away from the hand to the bookcase, I see something like a solid silhouette, I assume male but completely black. He was wearing a top hat. In a sort of bow, he takes off his hat and I really begin to believe that he wasn't sleeping. I shouted like never before, although my voice didn't come out at first. The room in question has no key or lock. My mother heard the scream, as did my brother. They tried to open the room and couldn't. They thought I was having a seizure. The entity, upon hearing my brother's hard pounding on the door, changed form into something I can only describe as a giant spider, the size of one of those yoga balls or so. It climbed up the bookcase, without knocking anything over, and when it reached the top, something like a head turned around. Without eyes I sensed it staring at me and muttering something that only in time did I understand. Quickly, it moved along the top of the bookcase towards the door. In doing so, my brother managed to get in. He told me he was shouting about what was going on. I don't remember what I answered him. But not long ago, he confessed to me. And it was the same as the spider had whispered to me. Years later, without me having shared this story, my ex-boyfriend, my little sister, and my other brother confessed similar experiences. All staying in that room. Once when I was a teenager, maybe around 15, I was doing homework in my bedroom. My brother and I had bedrooms in the basement. All of my family members were asleep in their bedrooms. It was late at night, probably between 11 to 2. I heard footsteps and heavy breathing outside my door. I was very nervous and could hardly muster the courage to stand up and listen intently. I recall hearing heavy breathing and footsteps. The footsteps were soft sounding. My bedroom was next to the back staircase that led to the laundry room and back door. After some time, I opened my bedroom door. I felt a draft and looked up the staircase. The back door was wide open. I don't think I slept at all that night. There was no explanation, and to this day I highly doubt it was an intruder. The whispering was distinct but also faint and non-human. Also, it wasn't windy outside. I have a lot of stories not of mine but of my parents and grandparents. One of them was when my grandfather died, and like after 2 months my mom had a dream where she saw a few souls just walking and saw her dad. She kept calling him and kept calling her mom to see that her dad was there, but he didn't look back when he walked into a portal looking thing. I don't know how to describe it. So when he walked in, my mom woke up, and also the photo of her dad she had, it fell down. The next day my mom asked my grandma like, did something happen yesterday? My grandma told that the photo of my grandfather fell down. Then my mom told her side of story, and both of them realized that the photo fell around the same time. Also, when my grandfather died my mom was obviously very sad, and I was like 2 years old, so I don't remember anything. Apparently I saw my mom crying and I touched her face and comforted her and told her not to get cry. Apparently I had the same tone as my grandpa, and when she saw me it looked like I had light green eyes. I have dark brown eyes, so it was kinda like my grandfather was comforting my mom, and this is like 1 to 2 incidents. We have a lot more. Last year I was feeling quite stressed after starting fall semester at university. On one particularly stressful night, I went to bed considerably worried and still nervous, but I achieved to fall asleep surprisingly fast. All of a sudden, I woke up in the dark to a childlike / angelical figure floating over my body and smiling at me. I can't figure out what it was exactly. All I can say is that it reminded me of a puppet. His skin was gray. I was totally paralyzed for some seconds, just until I started to shout as never before, as though I was crazy. Turned off the lights and went running downstairs. I suppose that most likely I experienced sleep paralysis, yet who knows, I like to think that everything is possible. At least I learnt from this that it's better to fall asleep in a calm state of mind. A lot lol, my mom grew up in a historic house that used to be a school for the mentally disabled. On top of that, my grandmother died when my mom was only 8 years old. My mom has several stories about that house, and me seeing my grandmother when I was a young child and describing what she looked like to a T, but I can tell you for me personally, just 2 years ago I was getting into the occult. I started to candle work and some ancestor work. One night I was trying to go to bed and my husband was asleep next to me, when I kid you not heard a freaking disembodied voice at my bedside. I couldn't make out any words, but it was a whispering mumbling that felt like was going on for 5 minutes. I got so scared and woke up my husband. First off, I don't really believe in ghosts, but this was weird. Right before we got married, my wife and I moved our separate residences into one townhouse in Tampa, Florida back in 2007. We had our bed in our bedroom and I was getting tired after moving boxes around, so I laid down on the bed and began reading a chapter or two in a book. I heard what sounded like soft footsteps approaching me from the closet toward the bed. The mattress was without sheets at this point and I heard a soft scratching sound on the bed and I could have sworn I felt it as well. So that was weird, but it wasn't over. I drive to my house about 10 miles away. As soon as I begin walking up the stairs, I hear a loud bang in the laundry room. A nearly full gallon of bleach fell off of the shelf and onto the washing machine. I tried to duplicate this by setting it on the shelf with most of it hanging off the shelf and it wouldn't fall. I have no idea how that happened. First off, I don't really believe in ghosts, but this was weird. Right before we married, my wife and I moved our separate residences into one townhouse in Tampa, Florida, in 2007. We had the bed in our bedroom, and I was getting tired after moving boxes around, so I laid down on the bed and began reading a chapter or two in a book. I heard what sounded like soft footsteps approaching me from the closet toward the bed. The mattress was without sheets at this point, and I heard a faint scratching sound on the bed, and I could have sworn I ked me out as well. So that was weird, but it wasn't over. I drive to my house about 10 miles away. As I walk up the stairs, I hear a loud bang in the laundry room. A nearly whole gallon of bleach fell off the shelf and onto the washing machine. I tried to duplicate this by setting it on the shelf with most of it hanging off the shelf, and it wouldn't fall. I have no idea how that happened. That being said, I moved into my ex-wife's mom's house about 12 years ago. Night one she said, "Hey, there's a little girl that lives here in my sister's room. Don't be weirded out if at 3 a.m. when you need to pee if you see a bunch of dresses laying on the floor. She likes to dress up. She's sweet, kind and caring. Don't worry about her." I fucking died bro lol WTF are you even saying? That night I was falling asleep and having a lot of trouble, UKNKW new house, new people etc, everyone was asleep and it was about 2 a.m. The most beautiful, siren, loving and soft box music played throughout the bedroom. Just hours I think. And I fell asleep fast as heck. True story. Lived in this house long ago. It all started when I had this wild ass dream sleeping on my couch one night. In the dream I opened my eyes to see a dark silhouette behind the couch and a bright white figure in front of the couch, locked fingers and if they were almost wrestling over me. It was still to this day the most vivid dream I have ever had. Since then I would hear things like my name being called from across the house, knocking from inside my walls, and my TV being turned off constantly. I first chalked it up to bad power lines as it was an old house built by my grandfather, but I decided to place my ear right next to the power button because it made a very distinct clicking sound and waited, and sure enough I heard the button being clicked. The thing that fully convinced me was one time late night, I heard someone walk to the bathroom, which was right next to my room. Minutes later, not thinking anything of it, I left my room to grab some food, and as I was walking past the bathroom door closed from fully open with immense force. It was loud enough to wake my parents in a room at the complete opposite end of the house. I stood frozen at the door while my dad walked over to investigate. We looked through every crevice of that bathroom and there was nothing. We moved shortly after that for a reason unrelated to the hauntings. I am still skeptical, but I've never been able to explain that stuff.